I'm Chip Hanna, and this is the For You Leaders podcast featuring Kirk Dando. We've studied over 8,000 successful, high-growth leaders. We distill their practices and perspectives down to lessons that you can apply today. Duo Security is acquired for $2.35 billion from Cisco. You see and hear the headlines, but what's really behind them? Today, you're going to hear exactly that story. As we say at the beginning of this podcast, it's all about the raw and the real. Well, today we're taking you behind the scenes of how Duo Security created, scaled, and recently sold to Cisco from their CEO and co-founder, Doug Song.
Yeah, Chip, Doug is, as you know, is one of the many CEOs that we get the privilege of working with every day. And it's really a privilege because of the backstage pass that we get to their lives and to their story and the insights that we get to really learn and grow with these CEOs. And I really want to thank Doug for coming on the podcast and sharing his story. And I know that many of the listeners today are really going to enjoy not just his story and his journey, but a lot of the insights and lessons learned that he has gleaned along the way. Growing a company that ultimately had an exit, but the story goes on for them, as you'll hear. I was able to spend about 2 hours with Doug, and while we could, cut some clips here and there and highlight some of the great tips and tricks around operationalizing the business or how to really build a culture for scale, but without knowing where Doug is coming from and who he is, it would really fall flat. It might even be a little bit unbelievable. Who you hear is 100% Doug, 100% who he is when the tape is rolling and when it's not.
You're right, Kirk. Doug is a very unique CEO, and there's one small sentence he said in the middle of the interview that I think perfectly encapsulated him and his journey in creating Duo Security. Here's what Doug said.
To do better, we'd have to be different.
And that's what Doug spends this whole episode explaining, how he approached Duo Security different and how it led to a different outcome than even he and his co-founders expected. Being different is a huge part of the success story that is Duo Security.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Chip. I mean, I think some of it's even counterintuitive. If the listeners will tune their ear today, I think they're going to hear some things that maybe fly in the face of conventional wisdom. And so Doug does a really good job of explaining why, and also the intentionality around why he drove those things forward. The other part is just listen to Doug explain why he does what he does. Security.
I think I'm probably a little bit less interesting than many of your other guests previously. I'm a bit of a one-trick pony. I basically just know how to do security. That's all I really know how to do, and it's all I've really ever been interested in. Hacking since I was 8. My dad had a computer in his liquor store, and I did all the data entry for all this stuff. But ever since then, finding access to networks, other people's computers, all the stuff has had some interest for me. So that's how I got into security. It's been something of lifelong passion and interest, but more recently also a community. I could have probably hung up my shoes some time ago, but I feel like what's exciting about security is that crunch all you want, the attackers will always make more. The big difference between security and almost any other field of endeavor in technology particularly is that you don't just have things go obsolete or have competitors. You have adversaries who are out for you, out for your customers, and looking to do harm that you have to rise to the occasion to protect them from. So I feel a lot of purpose in what is, I think, a pretty noble mission, serving that cause, and for me, that keeps it really exciting.
Tune your ears carefully, because this is going to become a common theme throughout this interview with Doug. Pay attention to how Doug talks about the mission of the business. He hasn't even mentioned the company that he and his co-founders created, Duo, yet. But he talks about how it is their mission to defeat adversaries. More on that in a minute. Doug, how did you and the co-founders start Duo?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I never really had a thought that I'd ever start a company, per se, but I really had no idea what I'd ever really do professionally. Anyway, very frankly, at the University of Michigan, I got into a lot of trouble early when I was a freshman. And long story short, I was on academic probation for a number of years, having to work for the university, doing computer security for the university defensively.
That was kind of your retribution, or?
Yeah, there was a bit of a penance to pay for some work I'd done unsolicited, right, to find all the vulnerabilities and issues in their security. So my earliest experiences actually weren't even really voluntary. I just ended up, working for the university doing this stuff, but I find myself quite enjoying it. Got me exposure to many different parts of the organization. And the university is an enterprise of enterprises, right? There's a hospital, there's swimming pool, sports business, lots of stuff kind of wrapped up. A bank, right? A credit union. And so there's a lot that kind of wraps up in that kind of work from a technology point of view. And that led me straight out of college to do consultancy. New York banks and Vegas casinos were kind of our target market, it seemed like, organizations we were either protecting or getting into. So that was my first entrepreneurial experience. I was actually joined a fellow who had been doing this, and we realized quickly that actually building products we can be way more successful for us long term than selling our bodies, in a manner of speaking. When you're consulting, there's not many ways to scale other than just adding more headcount. And so we decided instead to go build this product that we ended up selling, and that was the start of kind of both of our entrepreneurial journeys. His name is Alan Leibowitz. He went on to go be the Zingerman's coffee roaster. So he built a coffee business for Zingerman's, which is this basic force of nature here in Ann Arbor, Michigan, a $70 million Jewish deli. If you ever want to have a really good podcast guest on to talk about business, Ari and Paul over there at Zingerman's are great.
Actually, we're working on having Ari on the podcast. So yeah.
Oh, great. Yeah, he's written a bunch of business books and so forth about being a lapsed anarchist, kind of like I'm a not very good skateboarder. So, but it turns out skateboarding has a lot in common with being a startup founder, right? 80% of it's falling on your face, getting back up, and just trying it again, right, until you can claim victory. So anyway, so that first experience kind of awakened me to building product companies, right, and that could scale. And even though that one was bootstrapped and a successful exit, the second one was actually a venture-backed company called Arbor Networks, and that was with a research team out of University of Michigan. We grew that to a pretty sizable business, about $120 million in revenue annually, and all of the global carriers as customers. Before that company was then bought by Danaher, private equity group. And I'll skip sort of quickly to the end, having built businesses like Arbor, selling at the top end of the market in security, and then also going to businesses like Barracuda, where I didn't start that company, but I was recruited in to help prepare them en route to their IPO for what was a journey to the cloud. Barracuda was otherwise a bunch of hardware that you'd have to rack and stack in a phone closet or a data center to protect your email or your network. We wanted to basically deliver cloud versions of that. And it was a journey I'd never been part of. But ultimately, I decided I could do some of what I saw as the promise of what Barracuda was building to democratize security and make security something everyone could accomplish on their own, but start from first principles, right? I wouldn't have to transform anything. I could just do it that way from the beginning as a cloud-delivered solution. And that led us to build Duo. And so Duo is kind of this Goldilocks story, not too hot, not too cold, not enterprise, not SMB, but kind of start in the middle, the underserved middle market, and see if we can't wedge out from there. And so that's really the journey that I was on personally to start Duo.
We all like the stories of a good success story, and we know that it doesn't happen overnight, so the details are important. But one of the key details of being a really effective founder is really knowing when the conditions are right, not just competitively, but more on a macro level. And I always say great leaders have this unique ability to see more and see before, and Doug is a master at this. He saw the stars align to create really a massive opportunity in the marketplace. I remember talking to a venture capitalist out of Silicon Valley that early on had heard about Doug and heard about Duo, but they were just scratching their head. It's a security company in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and they really couldn't figure it out, so they passed on it. Obviously, they regret that decision today. But you, Doug, very intentionally wanted to start a business that was based outside of the Valley. You were being very intentional about that. You wanted to start something in Ann Arbor. You saw the potential of the business, but you also saw the connective tissue between the University of Michigan and the talent that's there. Right, Doug?
Well, Duo was the first company that we started that was exclusively here, at least as a venture-backed company. So when we started Arbor Networks, the company is named after Ann Arbor, Michigan, where we're based, about 30 miles outside Detroit, and home of the University of Michigan, which is the broadest base of academic excellence in the US, 100 programs roughly in their respective top 10. And only Berkeley maybe really gives us a run for the money. But we have a med school and hospital. They don't. So, and well, at least 1 point football. But so we kind of set out with a different kind of journey in mind for Duo in a lot of ways. So like when I left Barracuda, it wasn't that, I was disillusioned with the team or, the opportunity or anything else. It's just that I saw enough of what they struggled with that I realized that, we could do it in ways that wouldn't have to, right? So for instance, Barracuda was split between Ann Arbor and California, as Arbor Networks was split between Ann Arbor and Boston. And even previous companies, other companies I'd done like Zatu was split between Ann Arbor and Zurich. But having built all those businesses and those engineering teams specifically here, right, in the shadow of, again, one of the world's greatest universities, but actually, in a state that sports the fastest growing STEM sector, right, as a STEM hub of technology and engineering jobs, it's the fastest growing anywhere in the U.S. outside of the Silicon Valley. It just doesn't get a lot of credit for it because most people associate it with automotive, which for many of us is think of as sort of an American sob story. But I think, but truly, it's a story of massive sort of turnaround and opportunity. And so, look, when you try to build anything new, you need a team. I don't know, that, in my opinion, is more like, as Steve Jobs used to say, it'd rather be pirates than the Navy, right? And so what you're looking for are folks that are out for a little bit of adventure. They're more than risk tolerant, right? They run after it, right? When there's, something to do. And so, well, when you think about that, and at the end of the day, also, to be part of a team, they want to be part of something bigger than themselves. Well, that describes the people in Detroit to a T. The people that are still here, because folks that could or would have left have, right, through the challenges the state has had over the last decade or more. And so the folks that have been here are all those kinds of folks, right? They're the folks who are going to tough it out. The folks that have tremendous pride of place. They're folks that have an unbelievable work ethic. As I to say, Michigan's a bit more of a beer state, right, than a wine state like California is, right? So, and so I just think that there's a lot to that leads to the right conditions for success and to build a business. And so when I was kind of at Barracuda doing all this stuff and realizing just what all we had here to work with, and also the challenges we'd have, right, for me to take it further with Barracuda. And so anyway, I realized that it was going to make a lot more sense. The time was ripe for me to go and build something on my own.
Doug not only saw the stars align, but he also saw something that hopefully you will start to pick up on and see as the core to Duo's success.
The other thing I also saw was, frankly, that the industry just was not actually upholding its end of the bargain, really delivering effective solutions, right, to customers. Barracuda was effective in a certain sense. They were cost effective, right? Instead of a $25,000 Blue Coat box, you could buy like a $2,400 Barracuda box. But the market's much broader than that. And I felt actually a bit of moral outrage. The security industry, right, of all industries that's supposed to be protecting people, is basically completely unaccountable, right, to its customers. The vendors would basically sell you a box, you put it in your network, nothing would happen, and they'd say, "See, you're more secure. Nothing's happening," right? And for customers, it's just it's crazy, right? But it's a lemon market, right? Lemon market lies in lemon cars, like used car market. You buy something, you don't know until much later whether you bought something that really works or not. And so that was really troubling to me. And what I thought was really needed was an approach that was going to solve both, right? For the non-consumption of security because of the prices and difficulty and ROI and so forth, but also because we would make it truly easy, frictionless to deal with and apply design thinking to how we might help protect people. Because that was the biggest problem that we were really solving for, that attackers weren't going after systems, networks, applications so much anymore as they were going after users, which are the big attack surface. That was really the insight behind Duo, and seeing that combined with my experience, having built all these other teams and seeing other companies that I helped to grow, be successful here, I felt it was really time to do it. And like I say, there's never a good time, right, to do anything. There's never a good time to have kids. There's never a good time to, you just got to got to go. And my wife, in fact, was 6 months pregnant with my second child when I was like, I'm going to leave this company. We're going to go IPO in a bit. And because I got to go start a new company. And she is just the best, most accommodating partner ever.
That's awesome. I do. I'm going to ask you a little bit about family because I know how much you care about your family and stuff. So we are going to talk a little bit about that. But I love that she was supportive at a time where it would have been easy to say, "What are you thinking?"
Well, she said that too.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Good.
And a bunch more. But.
Yeah. That's awesome.
I think Duo has a great tagline. It's the most loved company in security. And the reason I think it's great is that tagline came directly from Duo's customers. It was not scripted in some back room by a marketing genius. That was truly word of mouth. But as you get to know Doug, it probably won't surprise you that it all comes down to one of the most important things and one of the things that most businesses could use more of. It comes down to empathy. Doug, how did you become the most loved company in security?
Yeah, well, I think part of it came from that consulting experience I had early, or my experiences actually being in the university as the customer. I couldn't afford anything as a university security administrator. We had to build half of what we ever used. And so I've always had a lot of empathy for those folks in the trenches. Because look, particularly if you're doing security, IT security, you just have to have a thick skin, and you just have to get used to the fact that you're never going to have any positive feedback in your career ever. Because again, the best thing that can happen in your watch is that nothing happens. And the rest of the time, anything that you're doing, people are just going to complain about. And so it's tough. It's a really hard business. And if anything does happen, you're blamed for it, and you're looking for your next job probably. You know, that empathy and seeing the challenges customers had dealing with all this stuff was really what kind of led me to go and do this. But the other was, honestly, seeing all these other companies successful that really didn't deserve it. And, you know, I'd be lying if I said I didn't have something of a chip on my shoulder, sort of seeing all this stuff happen in my industry in a time in which, you know, Michigan's having all these problems, right, from, you know, the broader auto industry, in a time in which, you know, the markets I was going after with companies like Arbor Networks were basically going bankrupt, right? The global service provider market, you know, the telecom industry basically imploded in the early 2000s, just as we were going out with our business. And so, you know, I think for myself, you know, the drive to go and build something anew and really go after it, you know, was very much a personally motivated, right, from my own prior experiences. And I can never speak to anybody else in terms of what they do, but that's all part of that. And actually, somebody else comes in, even down to things like, you know, my dad had a liquor store, right? We were held up a lot. I've been shot at and held hostage like Christmas Eve when I was 14 in the store. My dad was stabbed 11 times. You know, at a certain point, sort of realized that the world is not as rosy a place for everybody as you might normally expect. And there's a certain sense of duty I felt in trying to help make other people's lives maybe easier than mine was growing up, and more, you know, like you know, how people are sort of you know, going after each other or causing harm or more you know, online, and that's something that I think it's been important to you know, figure out how to help solve for in a way that everybody can benefit from.
It's easy to say that you had all the right ingredients, right, Doug? So you had the right idea, you had the right place, the right time, the stars were aligned. How did you go about actually creating and thinking about getting the company ready to scale?
We started Duo with just myself, John Oberheide, our CTO and co-founder, and actually Adam Goodman, who's still our principal security architect. But you know, very often we'll talk about, you know, Duo as you know, myself and John, because we did, you know, go out to spin that up earlier, but Adam had joined us less than a year into it. But from there, you know, we grew the team by basically doubling every year, in effect, and most years actually tripling revenue, our annual recurring revenue. And so it was a very healthy journey, one that typically saw a point every year in which we crossed the line on being cash flow positive. And so we actually didn't do a lot of the traditional Valley stuff. We didn't go out and do the Valley Roadshow to go raise money. Or I won't name them right now because they're now one of the probably top 3 VCs in the world. But at the time, their feedback to me was a little troubling, right? They're like, you know, we're definitely going to back you, Doug. You know, you're great. But the company has got to be in California at some point. And I was like, why? And they said, well, because every great tech company is. And I said, well, that's pretty lazy thinking. I expect a lot more of you guys than that. There are many companies that are great elsewhere. And in fact, I've been successful with a bunch of the others. But at any rate, I turned them down at the end of the day for an investor that somehow had heard about that deal, begged to come out to visit me in what was the dead of winter, right? And so I said, well, look, I'm already close to closing this round, but why not? Come out, we'll talk. They did. 24 hours later, got a very clean deal and very clear decision. And we've been partners ever since. That was Puneet Agrawal, the partner at True. But, that also kind of carried a theme for us as well. All the investment we took were from investors that came to visit us in Michigan because I wouldn't go out to see them or in many cases even respond to their emails, which is maybe what you've heard of from
Doug, I know you were very, very thoughtful, and I know that you take things into deep consideration. So how did you decide to sell Duo to Cisco?
Number one, we never intended to sell the company. But then again, we never really had very clearly an exit, if you will, in mind, because we never really thought of, any of these things as exits for our business. We didn't exit, certainly. We're still all here. But as I like to tell other founders, VCs do tend to invest in exits versus companies, right? That's how they're built. That's how they're motivated. So just always be clear about, how you're working to align that with what you actually need. But, we're just intent on building a great business. I think our business has grown most organically, in large part because of this intense focus on, as Puneet said, when he first came to invest in us, coming to Michigan, he said, I asked him, well, why are you here? You're not a security investor. You're not an enterprise guy. I don't know. He last invested in an underwater drone company. I was like, in a coffee company. I'm like, I don't get it. What are you about? And he says, well, Doug, look, yes, we're pretty broad as a fund, but we invest in movements. And I'm like, wait, whoa, this is deep. Where are we going there? But they were looking for, again, changes, big changes, right, to entire markets through innovations that were really moving those markets, right, in new directions. And the right kind of leaders that were doing this, not just with companies, but, leading communities, right? To those kinds of outcomes. And so he saw that, and he had referenced all that, but before he ever talked to us. But that is a lot of the way in which we thought about our job, right? Our mission has been to build better security, not just more. That there have been thousands of companies before us doing exactly the same kinds of things, sold exactly the same kinds of ways, with all the same kinds of outcomes and frustration for customers. And to do better, we'd have to be different, right? And so, Michigan was a big part of that equation. Being intentional about our culture and, our people, that if we were really going to do security differently, well, then we couldn't just hire from the industry. And in fact, even today, 80% of our hires come from outside the industry by design. I don't want the cargo cult thinking, right, of a bunch of people who are basically spoiled, right, by all the poor kind of operations of all these other companies that have come before us. I want people with fresh ideas, mental models, perspectives, thoughts, and experiences from outside of security that can really move us forward. And again, in order to do that effectively, we have to have the kind of culture that can bridge that, right, where all that kind of difference, right, means that we can learn from the difference, all that kind of conflict or friction, or all the friction, right, of those different ideas and so forth, we turn into creativity, right? So from the very start, it was always a very designed kind of journey to really be intentional, right, about the kind of business that we all wanted to be part of. Because I've been part of teams where even my own, at the end of the day, I didn't really enjoy it, and I found myself wondering some days why, right? Why and how? How did I get here in a job of my own creation where I'm not happy? It's a good question. It's a tough question.
I really hope our listeners have enjoyed this podcast as much as I have. What an incredible story. I want to double click on a couple things that Doug highlighted and spoke a little bit about. Kind of maybe overly obvious and embarrassingly simple, but we don't always maybe have the guts or the intentionality to follow through on it. And that's to get a different outcome, you have to do things a little bit differently. Duo did exactly that. I think you heard that in his story. What are the things that you need to be doing differently that you know your instincts are telling you that you need to do? Maybe conventional wisdom is pushing you a different direction, but you know it's the right and best thing for your company. Think about those things. Have that discussion with your leadership team. Identify those things and then be intentional about them. The other thing is many companies say they're obsessed with the customer. I think very few companies would say that they're not. But if you really get down into the actions and activities of how they make decisions on a daily basis, they're really trying to keep the customer from churning, maybe just trying to keep them at a level of happiness. But I think you heard something different about Doug and the empathy that they have for the customers and the desire to really put customers at the center of how they make decisions. And so think about your business. Can you have more empathy for the customer? Do you really understand what it's like to walk a mile in the shoes of your customer? And what can you be doing with your product or service to help your customer in their journey? The other thing is I've said, really great leaders, effective leaders see more and they see before. Doug used that to his advantage. How can you use that to your advantage? What are you seeing? What are the corners that you're seeing around that you want people to follow you on, especially your customers and your team? There are many other great things that Doug spoke about in this episode. I really want to encourage you, don't miss the upcoming episodes. You've got to learn a little bit about Doug on this episode, but in the upcoming ones, he dives deep into several really meaty, great topics. Board management, how to grow and develop people, and how to get people on the team and off the team as a company grows and why that's necessary. Do people really need to be in the office from 9 to 5? He talks a little bit about that. What Doug thinks about coaches and how he uses them, and much, much more. I encourage you, don't miss this. Thank you for listening, and have a blessed day.